Testing, testing. All right. And live? Yep, looks like it. Hey everyone, it's been a couple of weeks since I've done my last live stream, but I wanted to go ahead and do one more before I get out of here for the evening. I have a MacBook Air here, it's another one, that has intermittent power issues. So this one was very interesting. I actually didn't diagnose this one, one of my other technicians did, and it's already taken apart, but the reason this one was brought in here from a client is that it would sometimes work, sometimes not work. Upon further investigation, we did a visual inspection and were able to discover that there is liquid damage on this one. Pardon me for a moment. About that, it's 10:23 where I'm at right now, and the wife was just making sure that I'm still okay. So where I was talking about is this computer came in here for intermittent powering issues. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it doesn't. Then eventually got to a point it just quit turning on entirely. When we pop this one open, I don't have my overhead camera here like I do at my home office. Right now I'm just kind of using it from the side. But what we can see to the naked eye is this board is fairly clean. I don't really see any signs of liquid inside of the computer. All of our LCIs, or liquid contact indicators, are still white. They're not, they haven't turned red or pink. But what's so fascinating about this one is, well, it's working here. However, as mentioned, a technician has already taken this one apart and did confirm there's some liquid damage on it. So we're going to see exactly what that liquid damage is and if that's the reason why this is just having intermittent issues. So I have my power supply tool finally hooked back up, and let's see what it's consuming. So we're at 18. We're at 18.5 volts is what I have it set to, with 0.6 amps, which is going to be booting amperage. And I just heard a chime. Of course, there's no fan spin because the fan's not plugged in. So let's just go ahead and kind of pull this one apart and look at that said corrosion. Back over to our overhead camera here. And for the most part, it looks like pretty much all the screws have already been removed on this one. So let's continue. I'm going to remove the solid state drive. We just want to make sure that we don't potentially cause any damage to the data that's on there. Looks like our fan is still attached. That. Grab my screw tray. We just really want to make sure that whatever we're addressing is truly the right issue. Too many times I've seen where there'd be a little bit of liquid damage, and being that there's an intermittent issue, it's really hard to troubleshoot because you get inconsistent results. That should be all the screws. There really wasn't much that was left behind, so let's set the screw tray aside. And the rest of the logic board is coming out fairly simple. And I can see right here, there is a hint of corrosion. Now, when you have this type of corrosion, it typically means one or two things. Either the client lives in a very humid environment, such as next to an ocean, lake, anywhere where there's a large body of water. For instance, Charleston, South Carolina. I lived there for about 5 years, and it was very, very humid. Or someone could have spilled something in through the keyboard, because on the other side of that backlight layer we saw is going to... I'm going to put my glasses on, see a little bit more. And let's take a visual inspection underneath our microscope to see what exactly on the main logic board. And I accidentally had already set it up right where our liquid damage is at. Perfect. Let's just kind of look around the rest of the board, and we'll circle back onto that just to see if there's anything else we're missing. So everything around the system management controller looks fine. Our PP bus generator looks fine. Our clock and our SPI look okay. Very possible that that one chip is where all of our damage is at. Yep, I don't really see anything over here, and we've already given a visual inspection before pulling the board out, but let's give it a second look over just to make sure there's nothing we're missing here. Because sometimes if you have a little bit of liquid around this SMC reset IC, that can cause intermittent turning on issues. Especially around here, our PP3V42 generator, if there's ever any liquid around there, sometimes you'll have it to work. Sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, and especially in the SPI connector. This is just going to be a connector from the factory, and if you ever have any liquid in here, that will also cause intermittent. That looked perfectly fine. Around the CPU looks okay. So I think we just have a situation of some condensation buildup. Let's go ahead and pull up our schematics real fast and see exactly what this is. Switch over to our on-screen camera and have the board in this orientation. And it's going to be our U7501. What is U7501? If we look at the bottom right of our schematics, it is our 5 volts and our 3.3 volts. It's a power supply that generates our S4, S3 for our 5 volt line, and also generates our S5 state for our 3.3 volt line. This could definitely be one of the reasons why we're having issues here. Now let's look a little further into those specific components. So they're going to be in the bottom left, back over Flexboard view software, and there are a couple of capacitors. Looks like one is PP bus S5 high side, other hints. The other one is P5VP3V3 underscore reg 3. So if anything, either the shear oxidation or corrosion that we have right here is messing with the last capacitor I mentioned. That's called C7503, which is potentially pulling down our P5VP3V3 reg 3. But let's look exactly what that is and where that belongs on our schematic. That's more of the power line. I want to look at the specific capacitor, but it looks like that it helps set the different mode of what this U7501 is responsible for. If I had to take a guess, and this is all just a guess, this is going to be what kind of tells what mode it should be in, whether it's in the S5, S4, S3. There's a couple of enable lines I see here. So like we have an N1, enable line 1, there's a normal enable line, enable 2. Enable line 1 right here looks like that's going to be for P5 VS4 RS3 enable. So that's going to be, I would imagine, our 5 volt going into an S4 state, an S3 state, and then we also have our SMC PMG2 enable. I know this line, but I can't remember exactly what it's responsible for. I'll have to circle back to that, but I think that is a signal that is being generated from the SMC to turn on. No. I'll circle back to that one. If we look back here onto our schematic, we'll also see that we have enable 2, which is our P3V3S5 enable. So this is going to be the line that's responsible for turning on our PP3 when it's in an S5 state. So I think if there's any weird voltage fluctuation here on pin 11 for mode, this could be one of the reasons why we're having intermittent issues. So I think the most sound thing for us to do, for lack of a better term that I've heard in the board repair Facebook group, is we're just going to be board janitors. We're just going to simply see the corrosion, clean the corrosion, and run some further tests. So let's go ahead and replace this guy. I don't think we're actually going to need to replace our U7501, but let's replace these two caps first, clean up the area, and then see if we can kind of get it to intermittently fail on us. If it's staying consistently on, then we're good. If it still continues to sometimes turn on, sometimes not, we'll replace the whole 501. First, we're going to need a donor board to take the part from. And I think we have one right here. Yep. This will be a donor board for this situation. So what I'm going to do is turn on my fume extractor, my hot tweezers, and my quick rework station. First thing I like to do when it comes to dealing with anything with corrosion is just kind of going over it with a Q-tip and some isopropyl alcohol. Aha, and I think I see another issue here. You see that test point? That test point looks like it's barely hanging on. It's still there, but it looks like it's mostly rust. Let's see. Scrape away. Right here, that line has a lot of rust on it. So just to ensure the reliability of this repair, what I'm going to do is actually just run a jumper wire from this replacement capacitor directly to this pin. So let's finish etching, expose this trace. And while we're at it, let's just look up here as well. Know that we had a rusted line. Let's check and see one. This one I'm having to scrape pretty hard just to get through that top layer of fiberglass, so I don't think that we have any rust on this line. Let's clean the rest up with a Q-tip and some isopropyl alcohol. And I take back what I said about not replacing U7501. Since this is a repair that we want to make sure does not come back, let's just go ahead and replace that entirely. Optimize Logic Repair, or Tim, I should say. Hey Tim. Tim says SMC will send out the SMC PMG2 enable signal to standby circuit PMIC U7501. This signal will transform the MacBook from a G2 state, off state, to an S5 state, which is a deep sleep state. Thank you so much for explaining that. You did a lot better job than I could. Oh, and looks like we're dropping some frames here on that specific camera. Alright, let's work quick before this computer just kind of locks itself up. Right, so, got our rework station on. We have our hot tweezers. And let's just repeal and replace. We're getting about, this says 30 frames a second, but it doesn't look like it. And go ahead and wick up those pads. Now that those pads are all nice and wicked up, let's apply some replacement flux in its place. Not flux, I'm sorry, some replacement solder. And our solder has been replaced. Now we're going to need to get our donor capacitors. And I'm going to time out here for a second just so we can kind of see what is going on with OBS. Why are we dropping so many frames? Okay, let's see, are we back? Nope, we're not. We're just really choppy. Okay, let's just continue moving forward with this. Something's going on with this streaming PC. I can't win, but just for sake of getting this repair done in a timely manner, thank you for your patience while we get through this. Turn back on to our normal hot tweezers. And we're going to need to put this capacitor in its home, but it's wanting to move around a little bit too much. Not perfect, but we're going to come back and touch that up here in a moment. Dab a solder on this side, how about that? Actually, it's not even being held down at all. Alright, we'll fix that up in a moment. Now, let's just go ahead and repeal U7501. And what I'm going to do is just cheat here. Not necessarily cheat, I should say prepare here by just putting some new solder on our U7501 so that it's going to melt at a lower temperature. Is it just on my end that I'm having all these dropped frames, or is it also on the stream? Can't really tell because my computer looks like it's actually struggling right now. Tim talked about the SMC PMG2 enable, says, I read it a while ago. I knew that the SMC PMG2 enable did, but could not explain it. So in short, Tim is explaining that there's a signal that the SMC is generating that sends power or some sort of signal to our U7501. And from there, that gets the computer out of its G2 state, which I'm actually not too familiar with, into our S5 state, which is just going to be a deep sleep state. So it's waking up That's one of the first steps it needs, is that signal coming from the SMC. Yeah, stream is a little choppy, but not horrible. Really not too sure why it's so choppy on my end. I've had this computer running all day, and I run into issues with this specific setup where I have to completely shut down the computer, unplug the power, and just hold down the power button, almost like you're giving it an old CMOS clear. I don't have my temperature set correctly. I'm assuming the audio is coming through fine then, and it's just the video that is having a lag. The processor in this computer, though, is well over 11 years old, so it is probably on its way out. I always learn something from you, Tim, whenever you get on. I appreciate that. Spending some time removing this chip. A little bit longer than I feel comfortable with. Earlier I had my temperature set around 320 Celsius, which isn't really enough for the ground on this chip to melt and break through. Microscope's cam is fine. Okay, so then it's OBS on my side, because when I'm looking through my preview, it is probably 5 frames per second. Okay, let's see what is fighting us here. Ah! Of course, I see exactly what is fighting me. So, I'd perform 2 audio IC repairs this week, and it looks like in the process, I left my small head attachment on my Quick, which is great for iPhone repair, but I don't have my large attachment. This is going to be better for MacBook repair. So I just need this to kind of cool down for a second so we can quickly switch out our heads. I finally learned what temps to use to reball those floppy stencils. Yes, it's you almost have to approach a stencil from a distance, I've discovered, kind of heat around the general area to ambient temperature, and then you kind of want to hit it at a high temperature, at least what I experimented, coming at it at roughly a 45-degree angle. That kind of helps me out with some soldering my balls. Soldering balls onto a stencil. Soldering solder balls onto a stencil of a MacBook chip. Someone's going to cut that. Yeah, man. All right. So now we'll get our larger attachment on here, and we are good to go. Let's turn up the temperature and go back to the microscope camera. All right, let's try this again. This shouldn't take anywhere as long as it did. Yep, reballing audio ICs though, will definitely make you want to pull your hair out the first couple of times you do it. The big thing with those audio ICs though is the misconception that the chip is bad. The chips don't really fail, it's the traces that go to the chips that flex and tear themselves off the main motherboard. Logic board, it's an Apple. Think different. Don't call them motherboards. Okay, so now I can see the solder around the chip is actually melting easier. So the ground that's going to be holding the chip underneath should be loosening up. And the main reason we're replacing this chip is truthfully just for insurance. We want to make sure that, being that this is having intermittent failure, we see liquid damage around U7501, let's replace U7501. Yes, reballing CD3215s and CD3217s are also annoying. The one I have the most problem with is Wi-Fi chips. For instance, on the newer, well, I say newer to this model, but like a 2016 A1706 or A1708, the Wi-Fi cards on those seem to be very troublesome. They're identical to iPad Air and iPhone Wi-Fi chips, but they're not balls, they're ovals. Okay, what's going on here? This should have already lifted up by now. So all of our solder joints are actually melted, but our ground has not let up yet. There we are. While the board is still all nice and warm, let's go ahead and wick up our pad so that we can put some new solder. How are things in your part of the country right now, Tim? It is persistently hot and cold. We can never figure out what we're doing. Gotta wear layers. Okay, so we're putting on some new flux. And going to have a bead of solder and go around my pads. Now we need our donor chip. So let's switch over to our donor board. Let's apply some flux. Going to hit 59 tomorrow with a low of 18, LOL. That's right, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're in Michigan. Right? Here it'll be probably 30 degrees in the morning, and then it'll get to as high as 80 degrees. Then it drops back down to about 40 at night. The part that I have issues with, though, is the humidity that we have here. It's very swampy. Correct, Michigan. That's what I thought. I thought I've seen that on your Facebook, on the board repair group. Alright, so let's apply a little bit more solder to the edges of our chip. Well, I personally will be up in Kentucky for the majority of next week. I'm entrusting my store to my staff. I'm very, very grateful to have wonderful technicians. So it'll be interesting to kind of be in what I presume would be a little colder weather. Hopefully a little drier too. And now we're actually gonna cheat. We're going to hit this chip from two different sides as far as heat goes. We're gonna use our rework station as well as our tweezers and just kind of gently touch up the pins. Now, all of our pins are melted, it's just what's really fighting us here is going to be ground. And ground is typically pin 1, which is down here. Not always pin 1, but there we are. So that came off a lot quicker. I've never made my way out that far west. Know a couple of people that live up there though in Michigan. Wouldn't mind visiting someday. I just need to get out of the South. That's all. Not permanently, just for like a vacation. Things go according to plan. I can go up to Virginia at some point. I know that's still kinda technically the South, like right where it divides. But it's a different part of the Appalachian that I really appreciate. Plus, there's a couple of technicians up there that I'd like to meet in person. Hey Pedro, good to see you. Pedro says, pray for me, trying to get 2 A1707 LCD panels out without breaking them, one for backlight sheet, the other the panel chance of success minimal. You're replacing the backlight sheet, eh? I've only done that on an A1466, and that you kind of have a little bit more wiggle room. I've never actually taken apart a USB-C screen. Shiny Computers. I like to see the guys up at Shiny Computers. They also specialize in Mac repair. Kind of share the same core philosophies of running their business as I do. Or his business is who I should say specifically. If there's any folks up in the Portsmouth or Virginia Beach area, stop by Shiny Computers if you're looking for any Apple repair. They do just about everything, even retro stuff. I'll give that one to you for free. I'm not paid to say that. I just truly like the guys up there. Optimized Logic says, do they have a YouTube channel? They do, but the owner, Chris, doesn't really post too much. You might know Shiny Computers as the hosts of Logi.wiki. They're actually the people that are... The owner is the person who came up with the wiki that is now Logi.wiki. Before it used to be logi.shinycomputers.com, but the website's shinycomputers.com. Okay, so our joints look fine there. We just want to run a quick little jumper wire. So for that, I'm going to switch over to my micro pencil. Pedro says that he has an LCD with a bad backlight panel. It's got water in it. The other display issues, but hopefully backlight sheets. Interesting you say that. I actually just got an A1466 that we were refurbishing, and we discovered that it had water in the backlight as well. That sounds like a nightmare, I'm not going to lie. More power to you though. I really hope for a successful repair. And some would say that this is all overkill, but I like to make sure my board repairs don't come back. Have a 1-year warranty, but I think I've only ever had to warranty out 2 repairs ever. And just for crazy things like random SMC failure after we did like a backlight repair. Unrelated, but since it is a board issue, we took care of it for him. Cool. Now let's trim away our excess wire. And I would need to make sure that my pins aren't being bridged with this wire. Yes, Tim, or sorry, not Tim, Pedro, yes. That is the same Chris. Right? I just trimmed away our excess wire here. And then just to make sure we're not bridging a connection, we're going to take our multimeter here. I don't have my multimeter software hooked up to this one. But what we're going to do is just listen for a beep. And we want to make sure that these 2 pins aren't beeping together. And they are not. So we have no bridge there, and just to make sure we have continuity, we do. We're good. Now, put a lot of flux on this one. While I have it still warm, I'm gonna just kind of clean this one up. And it's kind of calcified, so let's heat it up a little bit. I have an LCD direct from Apple I bought from a lady off Facebook Marketplace. Kind of a collector's item. Oh, an Apple. Like, okay, so like one of the old ones. That's impressive. Antique Apple computers are very fascinating. I just can't really find the time, or I'm gonna get crucified for saying this, the usability. I know it's kind of more of a collector's piece. But for instance, I have an old 1994 Performa that's just been sitting underneath one of my desks, and it's fully operational, and it's just been sitting there for about 3 years, and nothing more than a talking piece. Conversation starter. I'm sure there's some really cool things you can do with the older computers that my poor mind cannot understand. Right, now that we got the majority of that off, let's just go ahead and clean up some with our acetone. And this is just getting like the residual flux off of here. This is just going to make going back and cleaning the rest of it just a lot more simpler. More simpler. More simple. Really showing my South Carolina education. Okay. Now let's go ahead and kind of clean up our area here. Wrong camera. Go ahead and kind of clean up my area here. Reassemble this board. And we no longer need our jumper wire. And let's see if that resolved our issue. I do enjoy working on this type of MacBook, the MacBook Air, the A1466 specifically. Get a lot of them, and I think it's just because it's one of the most cost-effective MacBooks. The barrier to entry on this one is lower than, say, a MacBook Pro. So it's more common. It's kind of like if you do any phone repair, probably have an abundance of iPhone XRs and 11s that come through. Because it's, an iPhone SE, the SE 2020. And it's probably just because it's the more cost-effective phone. So, see a lot more of these A1466s than really any other computer. I enjoy them. You do them so many times, they're all just pretty simple after a while. Now, sure, as many of you have seen, there is a new keynote from Apple on the 8th, which incidentally is the day after my birthday. And what's interesting is that there's rumors that there will be a new iPhone SE, be another cost-effective phone, but also potentially one other MacBook, or not MacBook, but Mac in general, whether it's a desktop or it's a MacBook Air. But the big rumor that I've been hearing around here is a MacBook Air. And it's just interesting to see how those come through, because if it is a MacBook Air, we're going to start seeing more and more of those, because it's the barrier to entry is going to be a lot lower on that. Especially because like the 14-inch MacBook Pro starts at $2,000. Sorry, 14-inch starts at $2,000. Man, I've worked too much lately. Okay, I'm not going to worry about putting a solid-state drive in because I'm going to use a test drive just so that we don't dox any customer information. And before we plug the battery in, let's check and see what our voltage is, our amperage consumption. So we got a green light, we have a fan spin because our fan's actually plugged in, 0.4, 0.5, 0.5.5, or 0.55, getting close to 0.67, and backlight. Kind of see, no, you can't. You can't see any backlight. Let me just go ahead, plug our battery in, and then grab my test drive so we can test this one out. But yeah, if Apple was to come out with a new MacBook Air, the only thing that I'm a little scared of is if they go the same route that they did with the iMac and have just multiple different colors. Now, one of my coworkers wants them to have multiple colors because they admire the color yellow. And they want to have a yellow MacBook. That's not me laughing, that's just more in the sense that it's the main reason for wanting a colored device. Kind of like the iMacs, so they have yellow iMacs now. Not the base end iMacs though, you have to pay a small premium to get the yellow iMac. Alright, so I'm just using a test drive here that has just a solid state in it. Boot it up into option boot. And let's actually boot into Test High Sierra. I don't know how I would feel about having different colored MacBooks. I think it would pay a nice homage to the early 2000s when they had, I want to say it was an iBook. That was way before my time, but they came in different colors as well. No, the main part that I wouldn't like personally is clamshell replacements, because someone would come in with a, let's say, a yellow MacBook Air, but all you can get is blue or red, and then you have this mix-match Skittle looking MacBook. You might have like a blue trackpad, and that might actually be kind of cool, where you have like a blue trackpad, a yellow top case, a green clamshell, but part availability is definitely going to dwindle if they go with different colors. That's just kind of my whole take on it. Okay, so it's booted up just fine. Let's make sure the battery's okay, so I'm going to unplug my MagSafe. Still on. Let's see if it's properly reading. This one is a 2015 MacBook Air. 8 gigs of memory, reading the processor just fine. And let's just shut it down, unplug the battery, plug it back in, hit the power sign, or power button, not power sign, but power button, and see what happens. Tim thinks that that could be the start of a trend. Potentially. I mean, okay, so now that I think about it out loud, I guess it kind of would be interesting if you had mixed match colored parts lying around. Because, I mean, if you've ever put like a silver trackpad on a space gray top case, just because that's the only one that you had lying around, it's unique, it's one of a kind. But then you start throwing in different primary and binary, tertiary colors, primary, secondary colors, that's it. That'd be interesting. So purple top case, blue trackpad, green clamshell. Okay, let's try this again. Power button, I'm gonna hold down Option for temporarily overhead camera. Tim calls it the Skittle book. Careful, someone might trademark that. Yeah, and it's still turning on just fine. So, I think we resolved our issue here. However, before I deem this one fully repaired and give it an ultrasonic cleaning, what I'm going to do is, throughout tomorrow, when I come back into the office, I'm just going to run a series of tests of turning it on, back off, running like Valley benchmark, just really stressing out the CPU on here, just so we get all sorts of different amperage consumptions and see if that does anything weird to this computer. But it does look like, because there was some corrosion, whether it was from humidity or it was from anything got spilled into the keyboard on this specific one, and it went through the backlight layer. It was resting specifically next to our 5-volt generator, or our 5-volt S4, S3 generator, and our 3V3 S5 generator, which will cause intermittent issues. So what we did just as a failsafe is we replaced those two capacitors, and after replacing those capacitors, we just made the executive decision to replace U7501 as a whole, just in case if there was some intermittent issues from U7501 from these capacitors being corroded, it should resolve it. Because these capacitors could have been corroded over a year ago, but then just started affecting U7501. So I think it would have been a better idea for us to just go ahead and tabula rasa and clean slate, start new from there. Once we're done ultrasonic cleaning, we'll end up going over my jumper wire, which was on pin 24, it looks like, with some mask, just some resin, just to really solidify it in there. But I want to say that is a successful repair. It's almost 11:11, some would say Make-A-Wish right now. And I think I'm going to call it a night before I come back in tomorrow and just kind of knock out the rest of the repairs before the weekend. So Tim says someday we want a shop tour. It's a very, very small shop. Really not much to show at the moment, but I'll just give you a quick look around the office, and then I will bid you a farewell. So, depending on how choppy this is, you can see it's a fairly small shop. 4, 5 technicians are able to comfortably work inside of here. That's not including lobby yet or storage room. But anyways, thank you for joining me tonight. You guys enjoy the rest of your evening. See you next time.